Hi guys, what's crack? Hope you're all well. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Finding Yourself. On this channel, I normally upload short clips from my full episodes of my podcast, Finding Yourself, which you can find and listen to up on Anchor FM and Spotify. But this past week, I've decided to use my YouTube to upload kind of update videos and promo videos around the podcast to let you know what's happening behind the scenes. And I wanted to use this video today to kind of give you updates on the podcast for next year. I uploaded a episode this week talking about my New Year's resolutions, what I want to achieve with the podcast next year. So I wanted to give a short video on my YouTube as well, talking about that today. Really, I have just surpassed my expectations with the podcast this year. I just recently recorded my 40th episode of the podcast, which is insane to think. Thinking back on the first episode I did, which was a review of Army of the Dead, and thinking back on how I felt about it then, and I was so nervous to put out the first episode, but now I can't imagine my week without uploading an episode and recording one. This podcast truly has become a passion of mine. I can't imagine not recording one every week, like I mentioned, and even though I started it as a way to keep my presenting skills sharp and to learn some of the basics of what I would need in a job in radio, which is my career ambition, I truly have found a passion in podcasting, and I want to grow this podcast as much as I can and make sure that I'm recording quality content for anyone who listens to the podcast. I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoy making it. I want to make sure that I never value quantity over quality, and that's why I recently went from recording 2 episodes a week to 1 episode a week. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't taking too much on and I wasn't valuing putting the podcast out rather than making sure that the content was up to the standards that listeners deserve and that I want. So I do 1 episode per week. It's a longer episode than you will get with 2 episodes a week. They're between 30 minutes and an hour, and I talk about things I'm passionate about. You know, when I started this podcast, it was up on YouTube and there were 10-minute videos talking about my favorite movies or my not so favorite movies, giving reviews on them. But I branched out since then to talk about gaming, true crime, movies and TV, as well as sports. You know, so I'm talking about all the things I'm passionate about in this podcast. I want to keep that going as well. I branched out to having guests on, which I want to continue to do. Overall, I'm thrilled with the direction my podcast has taken. I have a lot of ambitions for next year to grow the podcast. I want to continue to have guests on to talk about things that we're both passionate about. I want to dip more into gaming and have a full episode on that because I want to talk about Red Dead Redemption 2 in particular, which is a game I'm really passionate for. It's probably one of my favorite games ever. I want to talk more about true crime and psychology, lifestyle, fitness, and sports in general as well. I have so much planned for next year in terms of content, and I'm really excited for it. But also, I want to grow my network in this podcasting community. I want to try and get other podcasters on my podcast and be on theirs as well. So that's one thing I'm aiming for next year, to reach out to other podcasters in the Irish podcasting community. That's an ambition of mine. I also want to invest more in the equipment for the podcast and my workspace. I currently have a new workspace for my podcast, which is a home office, but I want to maximize the podcast, and the only way to do that is to make sure I have a good work environment for it and have the proper equipment. So that's one thing I want to do next year as well. As well as that, I just want to say thank you to anyone who's listened to the podcast this year. It's become a real passion of mine. Like I said, I started this to help me learn the basic tools I would need to be a presenter in radio, which is my career ambition. And I've dipped my toe into radio this year with work placement, and I plan on maximizing my efforts and my career ambitions next year as well with radio. But this podcast has been a great help for that, in learning the basics and learning how to present a show and piece together a show as well. So again, thank you to anyone who has listened to the podcast this year or subscribed to my YouTube channel. I want to make sure that I'm putting out quality content for you as a listener and making sure that you enjoy listening to the podcast as much as I do making it. So I hope you've gained something from the podcast this year, even if it's given you a few laughs or made you think or struck a nerve with one of your passions. Again, that's one thing I want to achieve with the podcast. I don't care about numbers. I don't care if I have 10 listeners or 500. The one thing I care about is the quality of my content. Are the people who are listening being entertained? That's what I care about. Quality over quantity. Because you can upload 7 videos a week, but if they're not entertaining people, if they're not showing your true passion, or if you're not putting across what you really love and who you really are in your content, then it's like talking to a wall. You're not going to get anywhere. So I hope I've put across who I really am in my podcast, and I hope that you found an episode entertaining. I hope you've had a few laughs with it. I hope it has made you think in some ways, and I hope you continue to listen. Again, I really appreciate any support you've given me this past year, and I see it and I can feel it when I'm doing the podcast and on my YouTube channel as well. So I want to continue that next year. Again, only the highest ambitions for next year. I want to continue to reach new heights with my guests, with my equipment, with my quality of my content, and with my content in general. I want to continue to have this podcast snowball. I plan on promoting the podcast a lot more next year. I usually use Twitter and I tweet out when I upload an episode, but I want to investigate other ways to promote my podcast next year. Maybe get some adverts on some websites or start my own website dedicated to my podcast material. I did entertain that idea this year, but I realized that I have other financial priorities at that time and I didn't want to dedicate myself to it just then and there. So I took this past year to think about it and the last couple of months to think about it, and it might be something that I seriously entertain next year. Overall, I have a lot of goals for next year and I have a lot of ambitions for the podcast, and I can't wait to get started in the new year. Again, I sincerely appreciate any support I've received this year with the podcast and the YouTube channel. I want to continue to put out quality content that you can all enjoy. By the way, speaking of quality content, I went to go see Spiderman No Way Home last night. I just want to give my quick thoughts on that in this video as well, because Jesus Christ, what a movie. I absolutely loved every minute of it. I haven't watched all the Marvel movies intensely over the years. My sister is a massive Marvel fan and she loves Spider-Man and Tom Holland in that role, and I got to go see it with her last night. Again, such a good movie. I think what they've done with this movie, the plot and the characters, I think every MCU fan will love this movie. They just play with everything so well. The plot, you think it's going to go a certain way from the get-go, and there was moments in the movie where I thought I wasn't expecting this at all, but overall the acting was excellent, action, ton of it, and again, like I said, they really do right by the fans in this movie. But again, like every Marvel movie, there is bittersweet moments in it, but overall I would definitely recommend going seeing this movie in cinema when you get a chance to, if you have a chance to go see it, because it is an event and I'm so glad I got to go see it in the cinema with my sister. It's a different kind of atmosphere in there and it just adds to everything. So again, I highly recommend this movie. I'm not going to spoil anything because that would not be cool. I have plans in the new year to do a episode solely dedicated to Marvel movies, and I'm going to have my sister on for that because she is the authority when it comes to Marvel movies in my house. She is a huge fan, like I said, so I want to cover all the big Marvel movies down the years with her, so we can get into Spider-Man No Way Home in that episode next year, and it'll most likely be spoiler filled. But I just wanted to quickly come on this video and say that Spider-Man No Way Home was such a good watch. I definitely recommend it for anyone who hasn't seen it yet, especially if you're a big fan of Tom Holland as Spider-Man. He's so good in this role. That's where I'm going to end this video. Again, my podcast Finding Yourself is available to listen to up on Spotify and Anchor FM, and if you want content around the podcast, updates and promos, you can always subscribe to my YouTube channel Finding Yourself. I hope you all have a happy Christmas and I'll see you in the new year. This is Finding Yourself with Kyle Duffy. Thanks for listening.